Welcome back to GA Fan TV. My name is Aaron. It is the All-Ireland final on Sunday between Limerick and Kilkenny, the showpiece event in hurling every year. And here it is in the middle of July. I'm delighted to be joined by John Keogh for this one, of course, journalist based out of Limerick and Limerick fanatic himself. So he'll be here, obviously, to help us break down the game and discuss this one in further detail. Just a reminder, we're brought to you by Declan Kirby, GA Star, the best children's GA book out there in the market at the minute. You can find it on Amazon, Eason's, all good bookshops, so make sure to check that out when you get a chance. John, how's things with yourself? We were chatting off air there. I suppose the buzz is very much building towards this All-Ireland final. Another one for Limerick. I mean, probably kind of crazy. There was probably large chunks of your life where Limerick couldn't even get near an All-Ireland final, and now you're in them every year. So I'd say it's kind of crazy, really.
No, Aaron, I've seen them lose 3. Don't worry, I've seen them lose plenty. Yeah, it's just, look, it's a fantastic time to be a Limerick fan. You know, there have been many years of heartbreak. That 45-year gap between 73 and 2018, and plenty of heartbreak stories in between. Yeah, you mentioned it, excitement massively building now. You know, we're Wednesday before the game, tickets are up in air, everything's up in air, typical All-Ireland final week. But look, it's great to be involved again. You know, Limerick going for 3 in a row, but they've an almighty task ahead of them.
Yeah, I mean, what's the buzz been like around Limerick, obviously, leading up to this one? Like, I know here in Dublin, like when Dublin were getting to their first All-Ireland final in 2011, like the first in 16 years, it was so much buzz, so much anticipation. I suppose as the years went on, it probably started to dwindle maybe a little bit with the fact that they were getting to the final so often. Like in Limerick, what's it been like? Is the buzz still very much there, maybe in a similar way to 2018, or has it maybe started to dwindle a little bit? I'd imagine it probably hasn't, to be honest. I mean, let's be honest, All-Ireland finals are All-Ireland finals, and especially with the fact that we're out of COVID pretty much, give or take, more or less, like I'd say, you know, there's a lot of anticipation, you know, when you're walking around the streets and all the rest.
Massive anticipation, Aaron. Yeah, it hasn't dwindled in the slightest, to answer your first question. Tickets are very hard to come by right now. I know it's early in the week, and invariably for these games, they do come maybe more available as the week goes on. But no, it hasn't quite reached fever pitch yet. But anyone I've spoken to, they're doing everything to get tickets. They're doing everything to get to the game. You know, especially with the weekend that's in it as well. You know, temperature's supposed to hit near 30 degrees as well. You know, it just brings another atmosphere to it as well. You know, but no, it hasn't dwindled. I can definitely say that. If anything, it's got more difficult to get tickets and stuff. It's always difficult to get tickets for big games anyway. Certainly All-Ireland final days, you know yourself from going to Dubs games, you know, they aren't easy to come by. But no, it hasn't. You know, I suppose part of that is like Limerick traditionally has always been, they'll follow a successful team. Limerick fans, Limerick GA hurling especially, has always had a very big fan base anyway. But you look at the likes of Munster Rugby, when they really hit big, you know, they got a massive following, not just in Limerick, all over Munster obviously and beyond. But like Limerick people certainly love to follow a Limerick team. And, you know, that doesn't seem any sign of changing. And even if they do have the odd negative result, you know, numbers even in the league earlier in the year where Limerick were far from their best, the numbers kept on coming to league games at the highest, huge attendances at games, you know, like unprecedented really for league games, and especially when it would be played in late January, early February, when the conditions were not pleasant in comparison to what we have now. So no signs of abating as of yet.
Yeah, and I'd imagine after the result against Galway as well, like and obviously winning that Munster title against Clare. I mean, in particular the Galway game. I mean, it was a close enough game, you know, kind of going down the home stretch. But again, like Limerick just showing that sort of Limerickness in many ways. Like they seem to always just find a way, like by hook or by crook, they'll find someone off the bench. Like obviously David Reedy this time around coming off the bench, hitting 3 points. So like I suppose you're going into this final in the best perfect preparation in many ways, having come through 2 big tests in Clare in the Munster final and then Galway obviously in the All-Ireland semi-finals.
Yeah, look, Limerick haven't had it easy this year. I don't think they've ever had it easy. No team has an easy run to any victory in any sport, certainly when trophies are handed out at the end of the season. If you just go back to that first game in Munster, Cork started with a goal inside, what was it, 50, 60 seconds, you know, and it started there. Okay, they got through that Cork game handy enough in the final quarter. You went on to Waterford, pushed them all away. I mean, a lot of us would have been thinking back then that it would have been Limerick-Waterford final. Look where Waterford ended up. Then you had the Tipperary game. Okay, Tip would probably rule missed chances there. But like you go through every game, the draw on Ennis, Limerick were missing a couple the same day, and Clare gave him plenty of it in Ennis that day too. And then coming through to the Munster final, pushed all the way again. And as you mentioned, Galway, Limerick have got, but they've gotten through these games. The most important thing is that they've gotten through these games. They still haven't been beaten in championship since 2019 to Kilkenny, and I'm sure we'll talk about that game later as well. But that has to breed a huge amount of confidence. They always just seem to find a way. Excluding that game against Kilkenny, of course, in 2019. But every time someone else pops up, you mentioned about the bench. The biggest thing for me in the last 6-7 minutes against Galway threw everything in them. I thought Galway were superb, really, really did. I think it was before the provincial finals. I was last on, and I was really tipping Galway to give Kilkenny a good rattle, and for whatever reason, it just didn't happen. We all know, I think, more so what happened with Henry and Brian Cody after the game was talked about than Galway's performance. And they really stepped it up. I thought their tactics were outstanding against Limerick. After an initial period when Limerick really looked like they were going to run away with things, Aaron Gillan was scoring for fun off Dahi Burke early on. But Galway just brought a 7th defender back, as John Kiley described it, and it worked a treat. And they were able to get scores from long range. They were able to pick holes and pick pockets in the Limerick defence. And but going back to what I was saying, like the biggest impressive thing for me was the bench contributed once more, as they always seem to do. Whereas Limerick didn't panic. I think it was David Reedy's second point. That put Limerick 2 points ahead and at a time, where it was a long ball came in. Sean Finn, I think, beat Conor Whelan to it. Broke for Barry Nash, or he made sure it broke to Barry Nash. Nash flicked it out to Hannon. I think then it was out to Dan Morrissey. And there was these 20-yard, 15 loopy passes. They went through their processes again, and it ended up with David Reedy in space in midfield and pulled off a fantastic score to put Limerick really. That 2 point lead was massive in that period of time. So it always seems to be, finding a way to do it, but they don't deviate from what they're used to now and what they plan to do. And for me, that's the most impressive thing. It was the same against Clare. Okay, Clare sideline cut after that wonder. Declan Hannon scored. That Tony Kelly sideline was sublime. Limerick regathered for extra time, and they wanted a canter in extra time. Clare were out on their feet. I think Clare, the struggle past Wexford, and eventually, coming into Kilkenny, that was that for them as it turned out. But that's the biggest thing for me. Limerick just don't seem to be flustered when it's put up against them. And Galway really put it up to them physically. They did something similar to what Clare did. They pushed really, really far up on Limerick's puckouts. They left Mike Casey and Sean Finn have it from the short puckouts and chance their arm from there. They were making sure Barry Nash got a very limited amount of short puckouts, if we're looking into it that way tactically. But Clare did something similar, albeit very different conditions to what we had in Croke Park a couple of weeks ago. Is that the template to get at Limerick? Probably. It seemed to have both Clare now in 2 games, and Galway have got joy from it, but ultimately Limerick still came through.
Yeah, and I suppose you mentioned how Limerick obviously came through, obviously getting to this All-Ireland final. I suppose Kilkenny have had a bit of an unorthodox way of getting to the All-Ireland final in some respects. Obviously got to the Leinster final, but lost to 2 of the big challengers in Wexford and Galway, but then obviously beat Galway in the Leinster final, and then produced a performance that I suppose no one really seen coming against Clare. I think a lot of people probably fancied Clare going into that All-Ireland semi-final. So what's been your thoughts of Kilkenny so far in 2022? Like, would they give you much of a worry maybe going into that All-Ireland final? Like, I suppose when you have TJ Reid, Owen Cody putting in the performances that they did in that semi-final, and obviously Mikey Butler, like, with the job he done on Tony Kelly, was exceptional. And I mean, you can't obviously understate the influence of Brian Cody. So what have been your thoughts overall on Kilkenny this year?
Very much a mixed bag. You mentioned them results against Wexford and Galway in the Leinster Championship. They didn't have to do a huge amount to beat Galway in the final. We've touched on that, and that was a big surprise, more so on Galway's side than Kilkenny's. But Kilkenny have just been getting better as the season's gone on. Put a huge score up in Dublin, and I thought really that's what really caught my eye with Kilkenny early on. I expected more from Dublin, but just it was a 10-12 minute period after this into the second half where they just took off. Just on the semi-final, they were awesome. They were awesome to watch. They were really clinical. Kilkenny of old, I'd say, even though they have a long, long way to go, obviously, from those great Kilkenny teams in the early part of the century. But they were awesome against Clare. You couldn't describe it any other way. Their tactics fully right. You mentioned Mikey Butler, whose job on Tony Kelly. has been well spoken about at this stage. But I think all over the park, they were very, very strong. We have to marry that with Clare's performance as well, of course. Yeah, they weren't let play, but it was a real tired looking Clare. They were taking wrong options all over the park. When they were shooting, they were delivering a high ball into Kilkenny. You just can't do that to any Kilkenny team. They'll mop that up all day long. There's so many talented players. You mentioned Cody as well. Obviously, TJ. We all know TJ at this stage. He's one of the greats. It's in midfield. They've really impressed me at times, and mainly because they've just switched it up so much. Any of us tuning in now or thinking about the game on Sunday don't really know what midfield Kilkenny are going to come with. Adrian Mullen, he seems to be getting back to some of his form before that horror injury. They've had Killian Buckley there at times. They've had other players at times. They've been really, really strong all over the park. I'd say ruthlessly efficient is how I describe them against Clare. Clare weren't at the races, but Kilkenny just stepped it up, and they didn't take the foot off. And the game was long over at halftime. And so as a whole, a bit of a mixed bag, but they'll be going in full of confidence. And I love this between the two managers. They're both playing each other up before the game. Brian Cody very much playing Kilkenny down, and in typical John Kiley fashion, he's following suit, playing Kilkenny up. But there was an interesting one. I heard Tommy Walsh talking off the ball, and like Tommy's usually so clear in what he's talking about. He was talking about Limerick coming down the stretch could be burdened by history. I thought that was a very odd way of looking. Yeah, 19 Kilkenny caught Limerick cold. No one could argue that, certainly in the first half. Limerick had 17 wides, and albeit they could have used an excuse of a deflection. They should have seen a 65, which invariably would have led to a replay back then. Limerick don't look at it that way, and that's important as well, that they moved on instantly. We weren't good enough, end of story. And then he mentioned 17, which was a funny game in Nolan Park, and then he started going on about 2007 final. I was just going, it's been very clear from the outset with this Limerick team, they're not burdened by history. They're very clear in that the history has not impeded them in any which way. So I don't see that being any issue whatsoever. I think it'll be very much the 15 on 15. A lot of this Kilkenny team, you look at TJ and a couple of more that have tasted a huge amount of success, but you look around the rest of that team, maybe outside of Owen Murphy as well, it's fairly bare of All Irelands. This 2014 since Kilkenny won one. I'm not saying it's going to be a major issue, but if anything down the stretch, if the game is in the balance, I'd go the opposite way with recent history that Limerick just seem, and this season being a prime example of it. They did it against Tipperary, they did it. Okay, let Waterford back into it with a couple of goals in the end. Came through it against Cork, managed to get a draw against Clare, albeit a poor performance in Ennis. Came through the Munster final, came through Galway. They always seem to have that little bit more. So no, just said I'd highlight that point. There's so many areas to talk about, but that's what I'd say about Kilkenny. They've so much talent as well. They always do. They always do. And that man on the sideline going for his 11th. If you remember it, it's not so long ago. Limerick had 10 All Irelands. And they do now. And Cody going for his 11th on his own. He's remarkable. People have been calling for his head since 2014 when they won the last All Ireland. He may have just built another team, and we'll find out more on Sunday. Obviously, to be successful in Kilkenny, in Kilkenny, you have to win All Ireland. To be considered a good team in Kilkenny, you have to win a few All Irelands. To be a great team in Kilkenny, you have to win 5 or 6. So, that's what's ahead of them, maybe down the road. But you can't but be not impressed by them on what they produced in the semi-final. And if they're peaking for this time of the year, well, then you could have an almighty battle on Sunday.
Yeah, and Sir Klopp just with a comment here says, how many times has Brian Cody gone into an All-Ireland final as an underdog? And I suppose it is a great point. 2019 probably went in maybe as slight underdogs a couple of times, maybe in the 2000s against, that great Cork side, probably went in as an underdog. But it is probably a bit unusual for Brian Cody. But at the same time, I'd say it's probably something he's relishing, because even in the All-Ireland semi-final, Kilkenny went in as underdogs, and obviously TJ Reid in his sort of post-match interview was, talking about them waiting in the long grass, and they'd seen all the, discussion about Clare and all the hype build. So, Kilkenny going in as underdogs, given their history as well. I know, obviously, as you said, it's a completely different side now. Not many All-Ireland winners left in the side. Completely new, young team that's obviously kind of produced in the last couple of seasons. But at the same time, Kilkenny going in as underdogs in any game really is dangerous.
Yeah, I don't buy underdogs. Any Kilkenny team is underdogs. Certainly not with Cody on the sideline as well. And more importantly as well, what they have on the pitch. I just don't buy that. I think it's a very tight. I saw somewhere in the bookies today, Limerick 2-1 on. Just don't see that myself. And again, mainly because Limerick haven't hit full form yet this year. They've more tests have been put to Limerick this year. I think John Kiley said it after Munster and before the Galway game as well. They've had to work very, very hard to get to this All-Ireland final. Not saying Kilkenny haven't, but have Kilkenny had as many tough games that have drawn energy out? I thought Limerick at times looked tired against Galway. They like even that Galway goal started the second half. Mike Casey switched off. I think he just lost sight of the ball as it came in for Brian Kilcannon's goal. I had a bird's eye view of it happened. He just took a step and Kilcannon moved one way, Casey moved the other, and that's all it takes. But no, I certainly don't see Kilkenny going in and Brian Cody going in as underdogs in this. Limerick naturally be favourites for the game, being All-Ireland champions. I mean, the bookies will never take that one on, taking on that favourite stag. But yeah, underdogs is the wrong word to use for any Kilkenny team in an All-Ireland final.
Yeah, and I think the most interesting thing, and you referenced it earlier, like the 2019 game, obviously the All-Ireland semi-finals, like obviously this Limerick side have beaten Kilkenny in 2018, as we very well know, but like generally, like that feels like the sort of one last wrong maybe for Limerick to sort of do right, if that makes sense. Like it's that sort of, it's a moment I'm sure that obviously would have hurt the Limerick lads and hurt the players, hurt the management, and it's probably what's in many ways actually gone and made them stronger and made them come back as good as they have been in 2020 and 2021. And I'm sure Kilkenny at the same time will take a lot of inspiration from the fact that they are the only side in the last 3 years to have beaten Limerick in the championship. So like when you look back at that game, like what were your memories of the game in general? I'm sure you've probably tried to forget as much as you could, but like what kind of memories can you remember from that game, and how much of them could play an impact maybe going into this one?
Yeah, my memories of it are just how wasteful Limerick were at times. Yeah, Kilkenny came out, blitzed Limerick complete. I think it was 10 points to 1 or something at one stage. I could be wrong on that, but I just remember Colin Fennelly's goal, and it was a very rare occurrence to see Sean Finn beaten the way he was beaten. It just Fennelly ghosted past him and buried it past Nicky Quaid. I remember a stunning Shane Dowling goal that really brought Limerick back into it in the second half. He kind of batted it from around 21 metres, bouncing in front of Owen Murphy. It was an unstoppable shot. Just remember Limerick being wasteful, but Kilkenny hitting Limerick early on with unmerciful belts. It was thunderous stuff, and you'll see that again on Sunday, I've no doubt. But Limerick, like the talk of Limerick could be going for 5 in a row and all this, like that's rubbish. That's you could also argue the toss that Limerick may not have won more All-Irelands if they'd won 19. You just don't know. They're all imponderables, but certainly it's a blot on the copybook. But again, I'll go back to what John Kiley says, and he's very careful about what he says to the media in the lead up to games, that they're a very different team from us. We've something like 14 players gone from the last team that beat Kilkenny from our panel as well. There's been that massive turnover in a short period of time, and probably something similar with Kilkenny. So yeah, while playing that down, of course it's a reference point for Limerick. It's like I'd argue that they learned so much from that defeat. To me, what impressed me most about Limerick after that was they didn't come out crying about the 65 that never was. They just said, look, we were beaten, we were wasteful, 17 wides. The game should have been done long before that. Were very wasteful first half, certainly in the second half. So that there was no, we demand this, we demand that, Hawkeye this, Hawkeye that, or whatever excuses under the sun that could have been used weren't used. And that to me showed a lot of character that they didn't. That maybe other teams in the past may have looked for things like that. This Limerick team didn't. They moved on, concentrated on 2020, licked their wounds. Before COVID hit, they were flying in the league, ended up winning the league, Munster Championship, and COVID hit, All-Ireland final against Waterford, sorry. And then, into last season as well, like with it. And so they've built probably from that moment, 2018 is parked, and this Limerick squad has built from 19 onwards, So remember in that game as well, that Declan Hannon came off early on. Kyle Hayes was switched back to centre back, and Barry Nash came in wing back, and it was his first real taste of a defensive slot in inter-county action, so certainly in championship action. So, you look back at things like that, what a watershed moment that proved to be for Limerick. I mean, all I'm seeing all year is Barry Nash getting better and better with each game. It's hard to think like he would have been wing back against Clare in that, or Waterford in that Munster final, and Clare in that first round in 2020 in the championship, where he played wing back all season for Limerick, in the league before COVID hit, and ended up a corner back. And you look at him now, like he's one of the first names on the team sheet now. It's amazing what things can happen, but it's too easy at times to look back at history as a starting point for discussion about these kind of games. They take on a life of their own. Every game does nowadays. Anyway, I think these guys at intercounty level now, Aaron, and you see it as well so often. They're just so clinical in their thoughts, and I keep using that word clinical for a reason, because you don't get to an All-Ireland final without that clinical nature. We saw it in the football last week with Sean O'Shea's free from 50 odd meters with the angle as well. I mean, that comes back down to so much work he's put in over the years for that exact moment to get. Okay, you'd hope it's a winning one, like Luxon's. If to win an All-Ireland, it's worthy of that. But that there wasn't even a hesitation. There was talk of Shane Ryan coming out of goals, but no, like there was no other person taking that. And that's what these guys coming. There's not TJ Reid or Aaron Glenn the last second of the game. If it comes to this on Sunday, they'd only be delighted to take that free that could win the game. And that's what separates champions from everyone else.
Yeah, I've been trying to forget that Sean O'Shea free. To be perfectly honest, just trying to put it in the back of my head, but
the OG wants to close them.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it all goes around in circles, and we certainly had our fair few moments. Orlally says here this will be the first proper test for Limerick in years. Well, I suppose, I mean, they have been tested a lot of the time down the years, really. It's just maybe the fact is have kind of come through a lot of those tests. Like you think of Cork last year, a lot of people thought that was going to be a very big test, and you sort of wiped the floor with them. And even getting back to that 2019 game against Kilkenny, like I suppose every time since then, maybe there has been a flat performance, or like you have gone 4 or 5 points down, or there has been a bit of adversity. Like the difference probably is you've found an answer this time, and maybe John Coyley, Paul Kinnerk, like they know their squad a lot more. They know which lads to be bringing on, which lads will make an impact sort of coming off the bench. You've obviously had the emergence of some more players maybe coming into the team since then as well. So, like it's not like the Limerick side that lines out in 2022 is going to be the exact same as the Kilkenny side in 2019, and vice versa. Like both sides have evolved quite a lot in the last couple of years.
Absolutely, yeah. That's it. Yeah, I'd argue very much that Limerick haven't been tested. I'd say they've been tested this year more than they have the return to the round robin. It's like Limerick won it in 18 on the round robin, then lost, of course, to Kilkenny. They went a long way in 18, and in 19 they went straight through to that Kilkenny game. But they've learned so much from then, and likewise Kilkenny. You just have to look at the players that are coming through in Kilkenny again. After supposedly a barren time, okay, yeah, it's 7-8 years since they won in All-Ireland, but they've been at semi-finals every year, quarter-finals, semi-finals. It's not as if they've just magically disappeared off the landscape. They haven't, but to argue this is Limerick's biggest test in years, there's an element of truth in that. I mean, it goes back to 19. I'm trying to talk that down, but it is a reference point for both teams. Kilkenny will feel, well, maybe if we try and do the same things again, maybe we'll get something from it. But it's shadow boxing as well. Limerick will think, well, if they do that, we have this, and Kilkenny, well, we'll try something different, so Limerick won't be ready for it. I think Limerick are a very different team from that. Obviously, you mentioned different personalities and everything, but it's a maturity thing. You mentioned about Kilkenny in the early noughties up against Cork teams, going for 3 in a row, going in as massive underdogs, and then bang, it's a blitzkrieg from everywhere, and Cork couldn't handle it, or someone always turned up for Kilkenny. And that's what I'm saying about Limerick now. Someone always seems to find that place. It was really the last that Diarmaid Burns' freeze throughout this whole season. I mean, you look back at that Tipperary game in particular, the Cork game. You can actually go Cork, Waterford, Tip, and Clare and Ennis. His freeze kept Limerick in games early on. Got them, just gave them that little lift that they needed to get into the game. So yeah, to say it's Limerick's first test in years, I'm the same as you. Like everyone thought Cork were going to come with everything last year, and Limerick just after Shane Kingston got that goal immediately after Gerard Hegarty's first, but just Limerick for the next half hour just took off, and it was from my point of view, it was a joy to behold, but from everyone else's, including Cork people, I'm sure it was a horror watch. But but it's so hard to it's so hard to tell and so hard to predict what can happen. There's so many imponderables. Again, as I've already mentioned, that are so different from 19. But like Kilkenny in a final, it's the first. Okay, like Kilkenny were massive favourites in 07. And, Limerick went up at hope rather than expectation, caught Waterford on the hop in the semi-final in a great performance. But I think the teams are a lot closer together this time around. Obviously, there's a lot of things have happened with counties in between, but more evenly matched, I'd say, than the teams were in 07. But yeah, it's just everything we're talking about now just brings it together to we're predicting things. The reality is none of us know. None of us know what little thing could happen in the lead up or the day of the game that can throw this either way, and that's the joys of it, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and Orlally was also saying here Kilkenny will give Limerick more of a test than Cork or Waterford did in the last few years.
Yeah, 100% on that.
Yeah, in regards to All Ireland finals, and I suppose it is a fair point. Like obviously Kilkenny have been in the the last two All Ireland semi-finals, All Ireland final 2019, and like they've had sort of an up and coming young side really in the last couple of seasons, even in that All Ireland final in 2019. You think of Owen Cody, who's obviously come through the ranks there. Cian Kenny, Mossy Keown, these lads. Young Tommy Walsh, obviously a cornerback as well. So. Like at the same time, look at Limerick side, obviously very young side as well. A lot of young lads, under 20 lads coming through. And with Kilkenny being fairly dominant in Leinster, having won the last two Leinsters, like this could be, like another part of a chapter of what could be a big rivalry between Kilkenny and Limerick down the years, because it is kind of mad that it is the first time they're playing each other in an All-Ireland final in quite a long time, because like Kilkenny have been thereabouts in the last few seasons. Like they were very close to beating Waterford, took Cork obviously to extra time as well. So, like we could have easily been talking about Limerick Kilkenny all on a final for the second, third year in a row. Like,
absolutely, yeah. That you mentioned players coming through Kilkenny. It's so true. A couple of years ago, you're looking at where are the next stars from Kilkenny coming. Yeah, Adrian Mullen had come through, but then that horror injury happened. Like Owen Cody came through with Ballyhale, as Mullen did. You've seen Cian Kenny, as you mentioned. We've already spoken about Mikey Butler and the job he can potentially do, and maybe the job he'll be doing Sunday. We'll talk about in a bit as well. Yeah, they just, if things had gone a little bit differently, you very much could have seen. Like there was a stat popped up during the week earlier this week that Limerick have faced Kilkenny more than any other time in All Ireland. When they get to finals, you think of 73, 74, 2007 as the most recent ones. But I mean, for Kilkenny, they've played everyone in finals. That's just a given, Kilkenny being Kilkenny. But it's just so interesting for me that, yeah, this could be the start of something special between the two counties, because it's crying out. I'm not being biased, but Limerick need a challenge. And we all thought it was coming from Waterford this year. I'm not being smart saying that Limerick will need a challenge. I'd rather Limerick won handy every game they went out and played, to be honest. But the reality is that no one wants to see that either. With what happened with Waterford, I think everyone was stunned. They seemed a coming team and just fizzled out in Munster really after the loss to Limerick, which we all thought that was going to be the first of a trilogy. But yeah, I think the epic battle, that game in 17 in John Kiley's first year that he's referenced several times this week, that he thought he could have been out of a gig after the loss. That Limerick, it was another wasteful day in front of goals. They should have beaten Kilkenny out the gate in 18. They missed a ton of chances, goal chances. Owen Murphy had one of his storming games, and then obviously we all know what happened in 19. So they're the most recent reference points, obviously. But yeah, I think given the age profile, the teams, Limerick's panel is still young. Nicky Quaid being the eldest, I think is 32 or 3 now. Then you've Graham Mulcahy soon after that, but then it's Declan Hannon at 28, and it goes downward from there, So and Kilkenny's young guns coming through as well. I just think it's fascinating. It's an All-Ireland final. You could find so many different anchor points to look at. You could argue with, what way could go or what way could go. Like, is Mikey Butler going to mark Aaron Gillan? What are Limerick going to do about TJ Reid? Will Declan Hannon continue to sit? And will TJ roam from centre forward? Will he pull out to the wing? So many different things. We talked the midfield battle. I think teams have really attacked Limerick in the midfield this year. Will O'Donoghue look back to his best against Galway, though? But Darragh O'Donoghue maybe had one of his rare off days and was eventually replaced. That ended up seeing David Reedy back in midfield. David Reedy massively pushing for a starting spot. we haven't spoken about yet. There's plenty of rumours going around the country today about Cian Lynch's fitness. It remains to be seen about that, but you could argue that Cian Lynch could slot in. Given Kyle Hayes' performance at centre forward the last day, could Cian Lynch slot in midfield? That week in Limerick, of course, it wouldn't. So many different things. And, as I mentioned earlier, you don't know what team Brian Cody's going to pick. For the man who picked 1 to 15 without failure for 20 years nearly, and he's chosen this season to make changes, nearly every game, and they've had positive impacts. So we've spoken about Limerick making changes off the bench. Cody's done this year by making changes from the start, and then being able to bring Walter Watch as a diamond to bring off the bench, and he seems really, really good at that role. Richie Hogan was back on the bench the last time. I'm sure that didn't go unnoticed by Limerick either. You just bringing on these guys, their legs maybe not what they were, but I'd love to be able to bring on a Richie Hogan or Walter Walsh in any time of a game, and they've plenty more to bring on outside of that, like of Billy Power. The Blanchfields, they're serious hurlers. David Blanchfield coming through now as the younger brother of Liam, and I don't know, it's just, again, I go back to it. There's so many exciting battles all over the park. Talking about Mossy Keown, who likes to roam out as well. Who's going to pick him up, or Limerick just going to keep the free man in defence? I just can't wait for it at this stage, Aaron. The more we're talking, the more I'm getting excited for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose you mentioned Cian Lynch there. Obviously, before we went live, about 20 minutes before we went live, was breaking sort of over Twitter from a few different journalists and all the rest that Cian Lynch, is twisted his ankle, or there's been some sort of an injury. And GA Show podcast was saying here, Cian Lynch spot coming out of gym and boots or whatever there, or a bootstrap or something like that. So, I mean, all sorts of rumors really flying around. We don't know which is true, which is not. And plenty of rumors.
If he was coming out of the gym with a boot on, what was he doing in the gym?
yeah. It's a fair point, isn't it? It's a fair point.
Look, the rumors are abound. I got a few texts last night about it, all saying different things about whether it was a broken bone in his foot, went over in his ankle, broken foot, broken ankle. I think there were 6 or 7 different things around this one ankle. The reality is we don't know. We'll know. If I'll text you if I see Cian Lynch walking with a boot later on. And again, it could be cardiology. It's not like this Limerick management team to engage in this. But I remember reading plenty of rumours about Aaron Gillan in the lead up to the All-Ireland semi-final as well. And they obviously proved to be on form. No, he may have been a doubt, but it certainly didn't look, after about 3 or 4 points from play after 5 minutes, it certainly didn't look like he was in trouble then, and lasted the full 70 as well. So look, there's no point saying, you have Cian Lynch in your team, you have an automatically stronger team. But it has to be mentioned too, outside of a game against Cork, he lasted 9 minutes against Waterford, came on for the last 20 against Galway the last day. Didn't look anywhere near his best, and how could he? And the same to be said for Peter Casey. So Limerick have effectively got to the All-Ireland, certainly without Peter Casey, who is their most accurate forward at times and who's lethal. We all saw he was heading for one of the great performances in All-Ireland final last year, 5 points after 20-odd minutes, and sadly did his crew shit. But Limerick have got there without effectively Cian Lynch and Peter Casey. So, if they're not ready, if something has happened, Cian, it'll be very much a case of, okay, well, we've dealt with that all year. Kyle Hayes will stay centre forward. It'll just be, and I'd argue, certainly from my point of view, I know he got man of the match on the day as well. I thought it was Kyle Hayes' best performance for Limerick in the forwards, I'd say now, in a long, long time. And I know he was moved back in 2020, but I just thought he was outstanding. I thought he gave such a presence. Yeah, he missed one chance in front of goals the second half that he had a ton of space for, but he created havoc in that Galway defence more often than not. And then, came up with that final catch at the end where Galway were sniffing for a goal. Cian Lynch, as I said, will be a loss to any team. But, Limerick will just operate as they always do and next man up. And that's, as John Kiley says, that's the way it is.
Yeah, in terms of some of the matchups then, which you were mentioning earlier, lots of potential tasty matchups, when you look at TJ Reid and who's obviously going to be picking up him, and Owen Cody and the influence of him, and Aaron Gillan, potentially a little tussle with young Tommy Walsh or Graham Mulcahy, Kyle Hayes going up against Mikey Butler. A lot of very, very tasty matchups. I suppose from a Kilkenny perspective, when you look at TJ Reid, Owen Cody, Mossy Keown, what kind of lads do you think will end up picking them up? Or do you think there'll even be too much of a focus really on sort of man-to-man matchups, or what do you reckon?
No, if we've seen anything from Limerick this year and over the last 4 or 5 years, They don't focus on the opposition, really. They focus on themselves. Key point in that is Tony Kelly's performances against Limerick. It was a 2020 in the joint Munster final, in the joint league final Munster Championship game. During COVID, he got something like 15 points. We saw earlier this year, he got something similar in the game in Ennis, and of course, it was something similar in the Munster final as well. So Limerick don't mark. They don't man-mark anyone. I don't see that changing. It'll be nearest man picks up whoever's in the full forward line. And like Declan Hannon will withdraw, one of the midfielders will cover, usually William O'Donoghue, and they'll go from there and withdraw their wing backs. Kilkenny have decided to operate something similar, I've noticed as well. In recent games, they are dropping Richie Reid as the loose man, the seventh defender. They're not even calling it a sweeper now. I don't know why. I think there was nothing wrong. I think there was a negative connotation about the word sweeper. But I've heard several managers calling it the seventh defender now. Call it whatever they want. It is what it is. It's still a sweeper. Richie Reid has been doing a lot of that since he's made that position his own this season. So that's been interesting from Kilkenny's point of view. But again, yeah, I think Kilkenny will go out. Mikey Butler, as we saw the last, will definitely man mark someone. Now, who that is, if you man mark Aaron Gillan, I think Clare really focused a lot of that in the Munster final. It left Seamus Flanagan wide open, and 8 points from play later. That was Seamus Flanagan's day, and he's had some games for Limerick, but geez, I don't think he's ever had a better one than that. Everything he hit went over the bar. So you man mark one of these Limerick forwards, it frees up someone else. And Kilkenny may just go 15 on 15 and see where they go from there. But certainly, whatever about what Kilkenny do, it could throw in a surprise. Limerick aren't going to deviate. I'd be massively shocked if Limerick deviated from what has brought them so much success since 2018.
Yeah, and I mean, which lads would you think, I suppose, from a Limerick perspective, could do the most damage? Or, like if Limerick are going to come through Kilkenny, which I'm sure obviously you're hoping for, and most people expect, like which Limerick players do you think could have the biggest impact and I suppose be the standout performers on the day?
Well, Aaron Gillan has been in just unbelievable form all year again. Like he's just some of the points he got early on against Dahi Burke. I mean, Dahi Burke is a supreme fullback. I mean, I don't know how many fullbacks have been as good as Dahi Burke in the last 30, 40, 50 years. He's just so good. But when the quality of ball has to be good into any forward, and the quality of ball Gillan was getting early on and throughout the last few years with Limerick has been sensational. But what can you do as a defender to a guy when he comes out and throws the ball over the bar, over his shoulder? He's quick enough to get out in front, and the ball is good coming in. So he gets out in front, controls it into his hand, and then on the run backwards off balance, he throws it over his shoulder, over the bar. It's absolutely ridiculous at times what he can do. Flanagan is more maybe streaky, and if it's Graham Mulcahy, he'll kind of play more withdrawn out towards the 45. I'd go, look, Tom Morrissey has had a funny year. His work rate hasn't dropped in any which way. His scoring prowess has, though. But the beauty of someone like Tom Morris is he doesn't knock a stir out of him. He a couple of bad wides in the first half against Galway last time out, and then he came up with just the most outrageous point to put Limerick a point ahead at one stage in the game, again from the right wing over the Cusack stand side. Garrod Hegarty is a huge player that Kilkenny have to be wary of. Every team has to be wary of. I'd argue a lot that Garrod is getting an awful raw deal from referees in every game. Every game now, it's just because he's 6'5" doesn't mean he isn't being fouled as well. And maybe that's a bias coming through. I know other counties have their own views that Garrod should be sent off every game he plays, which there's an element that's not true. I mean, that's ridiculous. One thing that does worry me, and I don't want to be talking about referees, but Colm Lyons is the same referee that refereed, we're talking about people that may have an impact in games. He refereed Limerick, Clare and Ennis, and not saying for 1 second Colm's an inter-county referee and deserves his place there. It was one of the worst red cards I've ever seen in my life, in any level of sport. I mean, I still can't fathom how that happened. I've seen it mentioned in a couple of times, and John Kiley mentioned it after that game. Like, is a Limerick player being targeted by referees? Certainly against Galway, I saw the close attention that was being paid. Fintan Burke was paying to Garrod off the ball. Don't mean that he wasn't hitting him or anything like that, but just anytime Garrod moved, he was caught in a bear hug. And I'm just saying, and I'm not saying for 1 second, Limerick are well capable of doing that as well. I just think you want to see the best players being let hurl, and that's across the board. We always had it with Kilkenny back in their heyday. They were well able to look after themselves. Like Tommy Walsh, one of the greatest hurlers of a generation. If Tommy needed to, he'd be well able to. I mentioned him earlier talking about the game, but Tommy was able to look after himself. And I think the same with Garrod. I don't think Tommy was ever unfavorably looked at like referees, and maybe the difference in size is maybe key here. I think Garrod could have a huge influence in the game. I think he's been bottled up in recent games, and I'd argue at times last year as well. He had a good performance in the All-Ireland. He scored two goals and a point, or I think it was that in last year's All-Ireland. I was taken off after 50-odd minutes. Of course, the game is over. But I think Garrod, I like not heaping pressure on anyone, but I think Garrod has so much that he can finish a game. You saw the goal against Clare in Thurles in the Munster final. I mean, it was just, and hearing him speak after it, we were on a Zoom call with him a couple of weeks after that, and he was just talking like like Tom Morrissey told him afterwards that he didn't even know where he was. He just got the puck out and hand passed it on and into an area kind of thing. But I was in Thurles that day. The conditions were absolutely atrocious. And he saw a Clare defender, flicked it over his head. It was instinct, and that's what we want to see as fans. No matter, like I'm saying it because I'm from Limerick and picking out Garrod's moment. We've seen glorious moments throughout the years throughout this season from every team. Look at Tony Kelly's performances, certainly against Limerick, where it petrified me to see him doing what he's doing. Like in the last minute of a Munster final, the worst conditions possible, the worst angle. I had a great view of that sideline cut, and we all knew he was going to score it. That's the beauty of the game as well. Like so, I just from Limerick's point of view, yeah, they can hit from anywhere. That's the thing. Like Tom Morrissey, they could end up scoring 4 or 5 points from play, and you're going, Jesus, where's Tom Morrissey been all year? Garrod could break free and just do serious damage, like we all know he's capable of doing. And then you've Kyle Hayes, who has taken a while to readjust back into the forwards since his move back there from wing back. But just looked against Galway, he got a couple of points, and you're just going. And there was a couple of other little moments that nearly came off for Limerick that could have ended up in goals from Kyle, and you're just going, if they'd clicked, Limerick are away here. So you could really pick out any of the forwards. I'm going to go with Garrod though. If Garrod has a big influence in the game, I can see Limerick winning.
Yeah, and I suppose you did obviously you were mentioning Colm Lyons there as the referee. I suppose hopefully there isn't any refereeing controversies or Hawkeye controversies or anything like that. I believe Hawkeye is going to be used for the final this weekend, which is interesting, all right, because definitely a lot of pressure going to be on the umpires this weekend. But I suppose that's a big thing, isn't it? You hope anyway the game is let flow, and it's a good game and it's entertaining and all the rest, because a lot of the time, especially this year, I was speaking to one of my friends there during the week, seems like every week there's some sort of controversy or something, and you're just hoping for the hurling finals, the football finals, the camogie, the ladies football final, that there is none of these controversies, because at the end of the day, a lot of these games are cracking games, and it's a shame really we have to focus on the negatives,
Big time. And I've said it to you before on this podcast, that don't want to be talking about referees ever, only in a positive way. And we have done as well. Praise, like John Keenan, he ref Limerick and Cork. I'm just saying from what I've seen of John Keenan from Wicklow this year. He ref Limerick and Cork, fine game, did a good job. He's been penalised because of 2 incidents that his umpires should have seen, and that can't blame that. Look, you're as good as your umpires, whatever. But I think that Munster final will go down, and that's just Limerick one. If Clare had won, it'd probably even go down further in folklore. That was one of the great games. In those conditions, it had absolutely everything. And part was that because the ref probably let the game go more than he should have. But sure, that's what we want to see in a game of hurling. Okay, we want to see big challenges. We don't want to see dangerous challenges. We want to see fair, legal challenges. And, I can't have an argument with the way that game was refereed. It was a great game. And I think the way he refereed it was, as a result, the last thing we want to see, and it's been said several times, and we all know what happens in the league. They pick on one thing, the league and the large part of the early part of the championships anyway. It was the throw hand pass. I've seen no difference since the quarterfinals in any of the hand passes that were blown up earlier in the year and not blown up this time there. And I don't want to see them blown up. If a disputed hand pass, the referee has a hard enough job. Why throw these things in at them? And I know I'm going to have a different to what we were saying, but they have a hard enough job. Like the last thing we want to see is a free taking contest deciding an All-Ireland final. It's just, and I just hope that doesn't happen. Whichever way it goes, once it's won, fairly and no controversy with like the Hawkeye thing. I think is still up for debate. There's stringent testing going on. The last I heard that they've solved whatever malfunction it was, and it was only relevant to last week. That's the last thing I heard on the radio an hour or so ago. But it's you know, it's the last thing, as you mentioned, we need or want to be talking about is any kind of controversy that's come from referees, technology, umpires, sideline officials, you know, all that. Just want to see a good game, and look, you know, whichever team deserves to come out on top for whatever reason that is, as long as it's not controversial.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean at 86 here says, who would you put, Mikey Butler on Flanagan or Gallen? It's hard to know. I mean, I suppose the idea of Mikey Butler going on Aaron Gallen, I mean, that would be a tasty matchup indeed, like especially with the form that Aaron Gallen's been in. And obviously you were speaking about him earlier, like I think he's the favourite for hurler of the year, or the front runner anyway at the minute. Anyways, I think he scored the most from play as well. Like he's been in exceptional form. And obviously Mikey Butler, we've seen what, you know, his performance against Tony Kelly, keeping him scorers from play. Like, so the idea of them two going up against each other, like that would be a tasty matchup indeed.
Oh, 100%. And, you know, like Mikey Butler's emerged as this man-marking machine this season, but, you know, I think Aaron Gallen will relish anyone, you know, especially he'll have a height advantage of Mikey Butler, and he'll be the type of fella, Aaron, who he won't deviate from around the 14 as far as the 21, maybe 45. And Limerick will just throw that. They love delivering low ball in, but they'll throw a high ball in. He caught Tipperary twice at the edge of the square for goals earlier in the Munster Championship. But then again, Mikey Butler relished that challenge. It's just one of many. Like, if he does go on Gallen, it frees up Seamus Flanagan and someone else. I say frees up, but there's plenty of other Kilkenny guys that can mark as well. But yeah, Mikey Butler has been a standout player for Kilkenny, and it's great. It's fantastic to see. He's not the biggest of lads, you know. He's not one of these Goliath like you see some fullbacks or cornerbacks now are 6 foot odd, and you're going, that wasn't when I was growing up. That wasn't a cornerback, but Mikey's kind of a throwback. Plenty of talent there as well. He's not just a man marker, you know. He can do plenty more on top of it. But yeah, again, I go back to what I was saying earlier. It's just there's fascinating challenges and matchups all over the park. If you do, for argument's sake, put Mikey Butler on Aaron Gallen, does it free up someone else? And Kilkenny will be saying the same thing at the other end. With Limerick, who's Mike Casey going to mark? Who's Sean Finn going to mark? In reality, I don't see. I think Kilkenny looked at Clare with Tony Kelly and the influence he has, that they had to do that. You know, I haven't seen Mikey Butler go do a man marking job to that extent than anyone else this year. I'm open to correction on that, but I can't recall it offhand anyway. So I mean, if Kilkenny, you know, and they may have to, they may look at that Limerick full forward and going, that's where Limerick can get the scores. If we can put pressure out the field. Tom Morrissey said isn't having his greatest year in front of goals. Garrod can be hit and miss at times. Kyle Hayes the same. Darragh O'Donovan is well capable of scoring points from out the field, but he does it at club level more often than not, but usually distributes the ball into the full forward line from midfield. Will O'Donoghue isn't a scorer. You could argue that Limerick's wing backs can score. Dan Morrissey doesn't do it much, but we all know about Diarmaid Byrnes, and Declan Hannon can produce even from that far out. I mean, Hannon scores every game, at least 1 point usually anyway. I'm sure Diarmaid Byrnes is a phenomenal striker of a ball from zone 45 up. You know, it's crazy what he can do. So I just think with Limerick, and again, I'm here to talk about Limerick more than anything else, but, you know, if you plug one hole, another one usually opens up. And I said, Conor Cleary did a great job in Aaron Gallen, both legally and illegally in the Munster final. And, you know, it freed up Seamus Flanagan and Rory Hayes, who'd had a fantastic season up to that date. They got cut for 8 points from play, you know, and Seamus, you're walking out. Yeah, Aaron Gallen had a quiet day, but Seamus Flanagan was the beneficiary of that quiet day. And again, it could be something similar on Sunday. I'm certainly hoping so, yeah, if they go down that road of man marking.
Yeah, like it seems like there's a lot of, like, just even hearing you say it there, like a lot of fires obviously for them to put out. Like if they are focusing on Gallen, then you have Hayes. Hegarty, as we know, like has, you know, been exceptional in the last couple of All-Ireland finals, so he could really sort of deliver a big performance. Look, I'd imagine obviously you're going to be tipping Limerick for the victory. I mean, you'd be crazy not to, and I'm sure most people will. But what's the verdict? Like, how do you think the game could pan out? Will it be maybe as comfortable as it's been in the last 2 All-Ireland finals for Limerick? Could it be closer? Could there be extra time, or, you know, possibly? Well, obviously there won't be penalties. Like, it'll have to go to a replay. But, you know, maybe there could even be a draw. Like, what do you reckon?
Look, every result is possible, Aaron. I certainly didn't think last year no one thought Limerick were going to beat Cork the way they did beat Cork. And I certainly don't see a repeat of that result on Sunday. Kilkenny, I think Waterford in the semi-final showed what not to do against Limerick. It worked for Kilkenny in 19. I think that's what Waterford tried last year. They gave absolutely everything in that opening quarter before the water break, and Limerick were still ahead, and Waterford were spent for the rest of the game. I don't see Kilkenny doing that, even though that's what they hit Limerick with fire and thunder at the start of that game in 19. So I think it could be very, very tight. It just really, from my point of view, and I think that Limerick's point of view, and the way that they've been since 18, if Limerick play to anywhere near their full potential, they win games. Even if they don't play to their full potential, they end up seeming to win games as well. But if Limerick play at the top of their zenith, like they did against Cork last year, and like they did against Waterford for large parts the year before, it's going to be so hard to stop them. It's going to be so hard. That game in 18, as I mentioned earlier, like Limerick had 5 or 6 goal chances. Owen Murphy pulled off heroics. Otherwise, they wouldn't have needed that Tom Morrissey score that eventually saw Limerick over the line. But I just think, I don't see Limerick being beaten, and that's not just being cocky. It's just that goes with caveats as well. Like if Cian Lynch isn't ready to start, I'd argue he may not have started anyway. I've talked to a good lot of people this week who felt that Peter Casey and Cian Lynch may not have started, irrespective of if there's an injury or not, given what Limerick have on the field anyway. I hear a lot of people talking about Graham Mulcahy doesn't score anymore. I saw Graham Mulcahy forced 4 or 5 turnovers in the first half hour against Galway last in the semi-final, so he's invaluable in that sense. Maybe his role has changed slightly. Certainly forced a goal. I think Limerick's second goal against Cork, Kyle Hayes' goal, or Aaron Gillan's goal in the first round of the Munster Championship as well. So I wouldn't be overly worried that Graham Mulcahy is going to leave you down if Peter Casey doesn't start. Or Limerick could throw a spanner in the works by throwing Cathal O'Neill in somewhere. You just don't know. But if Limerick play to their fullest and Kilkenny play to their fullest, I think Limerick have that edge. And it goes on what we've seen this year from playing nowhere near their best. And I still don't think they've played anywhere near their best at times against Galway, at times against Cork, at times against Water, at times against Tipperary, and certainly an extra time against Clare. I think, there wasn't just fitness. I think pure talent came out in extra time as well. But that's the way I see it. If both teams play to their full potential, I think Limerick have just that little bit edge on a Kilkenny team. That is coming. I think whether Brian Cody's the man to lead them after this year, win, lose or draw, that's an argument for Kilkenny people to throw in there. On the flip side of that, if Limerick are off in any which way, Kilkenny are the perfect team to do a job on them, and they'll. And that's where history may come into it from Kilkenny's point of view. They certainly have the belief. There's no Kilkenny team that goes to Croke Park thinking they're going to lose at any stage. And, there's a lot to be said for that. They just don't doubt themselves, and it's a fantastic way to be. But I think Limerick are that way now as well. They've kind of taken on that. No matter what happens, we find an answer. And I think that'll be the same on Sunday.
Yeah, I think so as well. Like, I think, you've shown down the years against the Corks, against the Waterfords, against Clare, obviously, as well, and against Galway when it sort of got, tough going down the home stretch, like you found an answer. So I probably have to back Limerick as well to come through this one and win the All-Ireland. I will be cheering for you actually as well, because there has been a bit of a rivalry between Dublin and Kilkenny down the years, and I'm not too sure I want to see Kilkenny get back to the top table just yet. I'm happy enough for Limerick to go on and win another one.
It's very different in Munster at the moment. Everyone wants to see Limerick lose, and in Leinster, everyone wants to see Kilkenny lose. I'm hoping that doesn't change anytime soon from our point of view. It means we're still doing well. Yeah, look, again, I'll go back and say it, Aaron. This game isn't going to be won easy by either team. I do know, like I've said this to you before, Limerick try and peak for Croke Park. At times, they got there against Galway, but Galway provided a lot of issues for Limerick at times. Will Kilkenny try and exploit those kind of issues as well by withdrawing a lot of players and trying to find pockets in between Limerick's, famous lines as they look at it? It's just, as I said earlier, so many interesting imponderables. I'll keep using that word that, none of us really know, but it certainly, Limerick Cork was a great lead up into the game. Cork looking for revenge from this, that, and the other. Limerick going for 2 in a row in their third in 4 years, and a year later you've another team coming at Limerick's throne, and it's fantastic. Kilkenny dominated for so long, and with their teams, and Tip have been thereabouts for so long, and Cork as well. And it was just so great in the last couple of years to see Limerick, Galway, Waterford, Clare this year really throwing it back to these traditional counties, and Dublin under Dalo as well when they were doing it, and you'd argue as well certainly that Dublin should be doing better than where they are right now. You can see Owen O'Donnell going into the football squad after the hurling season finishing. I'm sure he'll be hoping they'll be back with a hurley in his hand next year. But it's fantastic, and we've had a very truncated intercounty season, and the rights and wrongs of that can be debated into the night. But if we're going to have that, one thing we haven't mentioned actually is the potential weather for Sunday. I'd just laugh a lot if water breaks were being mentioned. People would lose their with Limerick and their perceived advantage of water breaks with Paul Kinner's famous tactics board, but it's a legitimate point that you're looking at, from what I saw, 28, 29, 30 degrees. And that's not on a pitch. I was playing a match last Saturday in that heat in Limerick. It was 25 or 6 degrees, but it felt like 30 odd on the pitch. It was impossible. Well, I wouldn't exactly be in the same levels of fitness as these guys, obviously, a junior challenge game. But, it was a case of, it was very difficult in that heat for anyone. And I know these guys are such chiseled athletes and so fit nowadays, but you'd need to be taking on an awful amount of liquids to try and get through that heat. And given Ireland's penchants for fair-haired, red-headed players that play our beloved sports, it's a legit issue, and something has to be looked at on Sunday as well. But that could play a huge part in it as well.
Yeah, it could do all right. And I suppose you're looking at conditioning there as well. And I suppose lads to come off the bench. I suppose, lastly, just thinking about that, obviously, in terms of players coming off the bench, that could have a big impact as well, as you mentioned, with that heat. And as we've seen with Limerick, with the likes of David Reedy coming off the bench, obviously Shamey Flanagan in the past has sort of been crucial coming off the bench. Limerick, a lot of the time, do seem to have the edge when it comes to just finding an extra 10-15% coming off the bench.
Oh yeah, they do. You mentioned Flanagan hasn't always been a starter. Peter Casey, up until probably last year, it was very much between him and Graham Mulcahy. Now Casey's sublime, but Limerick love bringing Casey on the last 20 minutes. What a player to bring on the last 20 minutes to try and win you a game or finish off a game. But on the flip side, I've mentioned already, Walter Walsh has had a huge impact off the bench at times. Billy Power, Blanchfield, whichever ones he decides to start, and I'm sure Cody being Cody will have something up his sleeve to try and bring and unsettle Limerick. Walter could be that very guy, he can mix it physically, and he's a break of pace even still after all his experience and all the years he's been around. He still has that yard of pace to get away from someone on the run as well. But this is it. You could be sure that the benches are going to play a huge impact in this game, and they'll need to, given the temperatures we've spoken about. And maybe this is the truncated season showing its ugly head as well, that in July, okay, we're not expected to be ever seeing All-Ireland final day 28, 29 degrees, but it's a legitimate issue for both teams that they'll have to consider, from every which way, even things like sweat getting into your eye, a high ball dropping in, anything can happen, small things like that. But they're the kind of things that will be taken care of well ahead of time, you'd imagine.
100%. Well, look, listen, much appreciated, John, for coming on, and I suppose best of luck for Sunday, and I suppose the 3 in a row.
Let's hope so, Aaron. Certainly from my point of view anyway. I hope you do it.